Hello everyone, my name is Randy Pazik and I'm a solutions engineer for Source Defense. Today we'll be spending some time talking about Magecart attacks, their frequency, their history, and the techniques used to perpetrate these attacks. So we'll start the day by learning a little bit about JavaScript and the DOM, both of which are important factors in a Magecart attack. The origin of JavaScript goes back to the Netscape Navigator web browser. Back in 1995, Netscape decided to introduce a scripting language to their browser. They tasked Brendan Eich with creating a new language after a mismanaged attempt at embedding Java and Scheme into the browser. In September of 1995, the language LiveScript was released. 3 months later, it was renamed to JavaScript in an attempt to capitalize on the popularity and name recognition of Java at the time. 2 years later, the language was submitted to ECMA International for standardization across all browsers. And in June of 1997, the first JavaScript language standardization was released. So how is JavaScript used on websites? Well, it's a coding language. It is used on about 97% of all websites, and it makes the website interactive. So what do I mean by that? So adding something to your shopping cart, for example, is a level of interactivity that we're kind of all familiar with. Other examples of JavaScript include conversions. So temperature conversions, currency conversions, distance measurement conversions. Playing video. So if you've ever been to YouTube, playing video is coded in JavaScript. And displaying messages or alerts are other ways that JavaScript is used. So if you've ever been to a website with changing or scrolling images on the front page, that's another prime example of JavaScript seen on really a daily basis and used across multiple sites and industries. So JavaScript, when speaking about websites, comes in kind of two forms. First party, which we'll talk about a little bit here, and third party, which we'll talk about next. First party scripts are typically defined as JavaScript developed in-house by the website owner, procured from code repositories, open source libraries, or it could also talk about JavaScript frameworks such as Angular, React, jQuery, things like that. First-party JavaScript may be used to perform specific functions unique to the website. This would be in-house code. As a web developer, I may source some of my JavaScript code from repositories for functions that are common in websites. Something like that image carousel comes to mind. I also may use open source JavaScript frameworks to automate or enhance some JavaScript functions on my site. A majority of JavaScript found on a website is what we call third-party. Third-party JavaScript refers to any JavaScript that is being written, referenced, or pulled from an outside source. This might be as simple as a social media plugin or something as complex as advanced site analytics and conversion tracking. Third-party usage may also include payment platforms, search bar autofill behavior, or advertising. Mainly, businesses are using third-party JavaScript to better understand what their visitors are doing, while also providing those visitors with a better experience on the website. Third-party usage typically helps businesses gain vital information on their users and trends while monetizing the site as much as possible, driving purchasing behavior while making the visitor feel special and unique. As the usage of third-party JavaScript increases, the risks associated with the hastily developed language increases as well. So here we have a sample request map of some third-party JavaScript on a website. Typically, you'll know the first and second levels of this map. So typically, you'll know the tag manager you're using and even the scripts you're loading directly onto the page outside of the tag manager. You'll utilize this tag manager to bring in these other services, so things like Facebook and Yahoo and Taboola and Microsoft and LinkedIn. But many times, what those third-party services are using or bringing in may be unknown to you and may change on a regular basis. So in this case, Taboola is bringing in Solvi, which is also bringing in Facebook, or also bringing in Google Analytics. And Outbrain is also bringing in their own Facebook integration. So again, typically the white outlined pieces you will know. Anything beyond that is typically a mystery or unknown to you as a website owner. So JavaScript is either embedded in or included from a web page's HTML document. And it interacts directly with something called the document object model, or DOM. The DOM interactivity allows JavaScript to change or add elements to the web page, all while the browser acts as the execution engine for this JavaScript code. So JavaScript does not have a notion of security or privilege or permissioning. So this is both a blessing and a curse. Some JavaScript needs to add elements to pages or read entries in certain fields, but this can be exploited by malicious actors. So what is the document object model? The document object model, or DOM, is a representation, kind of the skeleton structure of the web browser behind the scenes. All the elements that make up the web page are contained within this DOM. And JavaScript, no matter its source and no matter where it appears on the DOM, has full access. So if we build out this website here, we have our HTML code contained within, we have a head and a body element. Within that body element, we have a form element, and that form element is going to display a couple fields for the visitor to enter in data. So JavaScript running on this page here can read these form elements, these fields. Now, that's okay, that's expected. That might be validating the format, let's say, of a phone number, right? So, matching the phone number format to the expected format or email format, whatever it may be. That could be an instance where JavaScript needs to read the page, or even to validate a street address is a legitimate address. But JavaScript can also modify form elements or fields or any element on a page. So in this case, we've moved from name and address to name and payment info. We've modified a field with our JavaScript. This is a malicious activity in this regard. We're changing the input to gather payment information. But this can be used legitimately as well. For example, modifying the total due based on quantities of items in a shopping cart is an example where JavaScript may modify an element or modify something that is displayed to a visitor. Now, JavaScript can also add elements to a page. Adding elements to a page, again, not necessarily malicious. In this case, it is. We've added a social security number field, but adding elements to a page, not necessarily malicious. Things like, if you've ever done some shopping on some big name retailers, you'll notice as you're looking at a product, if you scroll down enough, you will have items based on that item, right? So users also looked at this. JavaScript is going to be dynamically creating that list of items for you to look at based on your view history or your purchase history, whatever it may be. So reading, modifying, and adding is not necessarily malicious activities that JavaScript can perform, but it can be used maliciously. So in summary, with this level of access to that DOM, JavaScript can add, change, or remove any of the elements or properties found on the page. It can modify images or other elements. It can react to existing events, such as button clicks or form submissions. It can even create new events to perform page redirects or alert messages. So let's move on to Magecart. Now that we know about JavaScript and we know about DOM access, let's move on to Magecart and exactly what that means. So Magecart can be defined as an attack utilizing malicious code injected into or piggybacked onto any JavaScript running on a website. Let's take a look at some history of Magecart, and then we'll actually get into some hands-on stuff and look at some attacks. Over roughly the past 7 years, there has been a dramatic evolution of client-side website attacks, which now plague both website administrators and visitors. Although the fundamental technique which these attacks use is as old as web browsers themselves, Magecart attacks, as they've come to be known, have exploded in popularity. The term Magecart is a combination of the words Magento, which is an e-commerce platform currently owned by Adobe, and shopping cart, which is the part of that platform which was originally exploited to perform this sort of attack. Magecart was first used to describe one particular group of attackers. Over time, the term grew to encompass 16 different independently operated groups of hackers who have exploited websites using this same technique. Today, the term Magecart is used to describe both those original attack groups, the many new groups which adopt this technique as their primary means of attack, independent and less skilled attackers who purchase the means to perform these attacks, as well as the attack itself. The term today is somewhat generic, like the common usage of Kleenex or Xerox. The security community has begun to coalesce around the terms e-skimming, form jacking, and click jacking as additional ways to describe a client-side website attack. In the years since the term Magecart was coined, there have been many attacks which rely on the same technique to exploit the websites, but do not use Magento as the platform or as the target at all. Many of these attacks do not operate under an e-commerce model at all. If you're visiting your bank or your healthcare provider, your sensitive information can fall victim to a Magecart attack. Your PHI, PII, and financial data is a target for these Magecart groups. Magecart groups and others that use this attack vector cannot solely rely on the Magento platform. So let's learn about some of these Magecart groups. We mentioned there are up to 16. We're going to look at, I think, 5 or 6 here today. So groups 1 and 2 we'll start with. So group 1 was first spotted, or we first knew about them in 2015. They cast a very wide net with their attacks. So they have over 2,500, probably closer to 3,000 victims right now to date. They have a focus on e-commerce. And recently, they've combined, I guess, their targets or their techniques, their focus, with Group 2, using similar tactics and activities. So Group 2 was spotted in 2016. Again, like we just said, combined with Group 1 now. But several thousand sites are compromised with Group 2. Some of the more notable ones that we know of for sure are Everlast and the National Republican Senate Committee. Moving to groups 3 and 4. Group 3, if you kind of look here, we started in 2015. We now have group 2 and 3 spotted in 2016. Group 3 has almost 1,000 victims, a little over 800. They have a high attack volume, but they steer clear of the high profile retailers. They're not going to go after, your Best Buys, your Macy's, your Nikes, your Amazons, things like that. Their skimmer is kind of unique in that it targets only pages which contain the desired information. So they're going to focus on basically only the checkout pages or only the payment pages of websites to skim payment data, customer info, addresses, phone numbers, things like that. Group 4, they have some more advanced tactics. They also have a high volume, and they have a goal of basically getting as many cards as possible. I mentioned kind of getting as many cards as possible. Some groups choose to use randomization on when their vulnerability or their attack actually executes in the browser. So you may only be one of 26 before it executes. Group 4 is going to go after as many. So they're going to trigger for every visit to that page. They also try to blend in with normal traffic. They use domains that emulate the names of existing domains that are used on a site. An example there that I've seen is Google Analytics, which is, everyone knows how to spell Google if you go there. It's Google. Group 4 may use something like GOCGLE as their domain. This is to cause analysts trouble when skimming or reviewing alerts from other systems, that they may see traffic being sent to GOCGLE, which is Gockel, instead of Google. It looks like an O. When skimming, it may take you a couple weeks or a couple months or even a couple days to find that information is not going to Google, it's going to Gockel. And that's ultimately the goal of Group 4, is to kind of hide within the site, not be known, and try to do that in innovative and advanced ways. Final two here, Group 5 and Group 12. So another one spotted in 2016, Group 5. I only bring them up because they were responsible for the Ticketmaster breach. The Ticketmaster breach, for those that are unaware, used a bit of randomization, as I just mentioned, but also used a third-party chat service to kind of perpetrate the attack, to get the visitor to enter information inside of that third-party chat service, and then Group 5 exfiltrated that data out. As of right now, well, I should say as of a few months ago when I built this presentation, we only know of about 12 victims from a Group 5 style attack. I have Group 12 up here. Obviously, I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have Group 12 again because I want to call out specifics for Group 12. In September of 2020, so just under a year ago, they were responsible for an attack that focused on the Magento platform again. It went back there. That attack was called Cardbleed. They're also responsible in May of this year, so just a few months ago, for the favicon Magecart attack. So they were actually hiding code in the favicons of websites. So if we go back kind of to where it all began, back to that September 2020 attack, Group 12 attacked the Magecart platform. This attack compromised thousands of websites using that Magento end-of-life platform. So there are a handful of reasons for this, including kind of the expertise that those attack groups have gained by compromising the Magento platform for years. Adobe recently made a decision to end support for Magento 1 and try to move everyone to Magento 2. So with Magento 1 being outdated, it became a target because we knew that security updates were not coming for Magento 1. And the Magento 1 install base is not insignificant. So there were over 2,800 different sites affected by that September 2020 attack, which is a little under 5% of the total Magento install base. So low quantity if you kind of consider all Magento platforms, but to have almost 3,000 sites affected by one attack is pretty good. So given this news, right, it seems that Magecart remains a Magento-only problem, which unfortunately leads many to think that if they are not a Magento shop, they don't need to worry about Magecart. And unfortunately, this is not the case. So let's look at what techniques these Magecart groups use to implant or compromise JavaScript. As was the case in September 2020, the attack that compromised Magento 1. However, there are many other high-profile and widespread attack campaigns that have been waged against website applications like WordPress, Heroku from Salesforce, Shopify, WooCommerce, even web server applications themselves. Attacking the technology which serves the content to the browser is a universal technique, no matter what that technology is. So another technique is exploiting a hosting provider or content delivery network. This technique has been used against Amazon's S3 service, content deliveries devoted to hosting JavaScript code for independent sites such as GitHub. And another way to think of this attack is this technique is as a well poisoning attack. By embedding an attack payload within a resource accessed by multiple independent websites, attackers can gain successfully compromised information on many targets with minimal effort. By not properly securing your JavaScript sources, you open yourself up to an attack. while not a JavaScript attack, the SolarWinds kind of, I guess we'll call it a debacle, was due to an improperly secured account with a very easy to guess password. So it's important to make sure if you're sourcing from GitHub or sourcing from a repository, do your due diligence to make sure that that repository is secured and secured well. Third technique we'll discuss is exploiting a third-party vendor to, I guess, sideload the attack onto a website. In this scenario, the attacker breaks into the servers owned by a third-party vendor. And these vendors often provide services like analytics and marketing and customer support and other business services, which a company needs to include on its website, but is unlikely to develop in-house. By compromising one of these vendors and embedding a payload within that vendor's code, the attacker thereby gains access to any of that vendor's customers and all of those customers' visitors. As an example, maybe you're a healthcare provider or e-commerce site that utilizes third-party chat services to provide your visitors and customers with live support via chat. If this service is compromised, and when using it, the service now prompts the visitor with a form to fill in information, that information can be exfiltrated out. If those form fields ask for payment information or PII, PHI, then you as a company are liable for any damages caused by that compromise. And I guess the final technique we'll talk about, the most recent one, happened in March and in May of 2021. Using images to hide Magecart code or stolen data has become kind of a more recent trend, more advanced technique. So in March of 2021, using a created image to hide stolen data, a group was able to exfiltrate data from normal detection tools, kind of hide from normal detection tools. And in May, again, we go back to that fave icon. So we exploited a fave icon to store Magecart code for later injection into the website. So we know the techniques, we know JavaScript and DOM, we know the history of Magecart. Let's visualize how these attacks actually get into the visitor's browser. So let's build a page view for a website. So in this case, we're going to start with a browser. This browser is going to be on a computer, on a tablet, on a mobile device, on a communicator, any type of device which has a modern web browser. That's what we're viewing here. And this browser is going to reach out to a web server. Let's call it Nike.com or Amazon.com, or pick your favorite e-commerce site.com. And it's going to reach out to that web server and it's going to say, hey, give me the content, right? Give me all the content for this site. I need to load it for this visitor. And the web server is going to pass along the content through firewalls and WAFs and through SSL and TLS connections and kind of through all of that OWASP top 10 web app security suite of products, which everyone is kind of familiar with at this point in time. But contained within that HTML document, contained as part of the content for the website, will be references to JavaScript. JavaScript will be referenced on the first party side. So we have, again, static file hosting, CDNs, JavaScript libraries, repositories, whatever it may be. And on the third party side, as we talked about, we're going to get some analytics services and advertising services and social media plugins and support services and all sorts of different things on the third party side. The tricky part on the third party side is those third party sources of JavaScript can bring in their own third parties, something we would call a fourth party, and a fourth party may bring in a fifth and a sixth, et cetera, et cetera. All of that code is being executed from the fourth, fifth, sixth party, from the third party, from the first party. All of that code is being executed within the browser itself. So that browser executes the code and builds the content, builds the web page. And all of this happens within milliseconds of you kind of clicking enter or hitting, clicking your mouse or whatever it may be. So if an attacker wants to steal information from visitors that are visiting this e-commerce site, the attacker can choose different ways to go about it. It can go after first party. It can go after third party. Ultimately, it's going to go after either whatever is going to make the most money for the attacker, cause the most disruption for the website, or is the easiest, right? The weakest link in this third party or first party JavaScript supply chain. By compromising a source of JavaScript on either side, first or third party, it allows data exfiltration to happen out of the browser itself, rather than out of the connection back to the web server. An example of this might be if I am visiting a website and I am buying shoes, and I add those shoes to my cart and I go to checkout, and I type in my credit card information into the payment page on the checkout screen, and I realize I have forgotten to buy socks to go with my shoes. Now, I have not clicked pay or checkout or submit, but if I were to use my mouse or my keyboard to navigate back to the socks section of the website, my information being within those fields has been skimmed now by a Magecart attacker that's on the site, a Magecart attack that's running on the site. And my information can be exfiltrated at that point in time. Even if I go back to the socks page and I accidentally close my browser and I have to reopen it and redo everything again, even though I didn't send the information, and even though all I did was type it into the field, to the form, that information can be exfiltrated and stolen at that time. So a transaction of purchasing product or logging in or updating personal information, that transaction does not need to happen. I just need to type the information into the fields, and at that point, the attack or the skimming has taken place. So let's look at some victims of Magecart attacks. We mentioned a couple while we were looking at the groups, and a little bit more on kind of the history of the attack as a whole. So I mentioned for about 7 years or so, there's been Magecart attacks have kind of been known. So we know the first one was reported in 2014. For years that we have statistics for, we know that over 2 million client-side attacks took place between 2016 and 2018. We know that the growth of the attacks during that time period was about 72% each year, year over year. And we know that today, right, so as of July 2021, we know that there are attacks for sale on the dark web. For as little as $250, you can get a prepackaged attack on the dark web. And they actually have now attacks that are for sale on the dark web that come with customer service. So you can pay a couple $1,000s and actually get support for your attacks as you're trying to successfully inject into a website or into a repository. You can get live support. There have been alerts issued by Visa, the PCI Council, the FBI. And we know that these attacks are increasing in complexity, right? We mentioned just 2 of them this year, hiding the data within images and also hiding the attack itself within favicons on a site. So some of the victims that we know about that are kind of out there in the public, we know of victims across many different industries. So there's a lot of obviously e-commerce or travel here, events. There's some financial institutions, higher education institutions, things like Macy's, British Airways, Ticketmaster. Those have made the news. Hannah Anderson here, children's clothing, made the news in California going after CCPA. Hannah Anderson was a co-defendant along with Salesforce for a CCPA violation based on a Magecart attack. And Salesforce actually walked. They were proven to not be liable, even though Salesforce served up, the platform served up the malicious code to Hannah Anderson's page and subsequently Hannah Anderson's visitors. The courts ruled it was Hannah Anderson that was liable and at fault for not validating or sanitizing that code before the attack took place. So again, there are, healthcare, there's higher ed, there's finance, there's ticketing and events and e-commerce. So this attack spans multiple industries. So in summary, because JavaScript, irrespective of its source, whether first party, third party, embedded by an attacker, or legitimately included in a site, because that JavaScript has no internal security controls, no notion of permission, and no way to limit access to the web page within the browser or the information contained therein, this attack is possible, irrespective of platform, configuration, industry, or existing security protocols. Like many common terms, the origin of the word Magecart is a combination of history and necessity. And like many terms, it has grown to encompass a number of meanings beyond its specific origins. Because of the immense growth of Magecart attacks over the past 5 years, it unfortunately seems clear that the term will only become more commonly used and become a more important part of any security professional's lexicon. So at this point in time, you may be asking yourself, how do I know if I'm at risk? And that mindset applies to you, the website owner, right? The owner of your e-commerce or healthcare or financial website, and yourself as an e-commerce participant, purchasing items, entering information. So let's look at some ways to analyze and quantify this website risk. We'll start by looking at ways you can measure your risk as a website visitor. Getting an understanding of what third parties are being used on a site may help you understand where your risk level is. There are a couple of tools we can use to get some information on what your risk is while visiting a website. The tools can be installed in your Google Chrome browser and are called Ghostery and UBO Scope. So I'm just going to pull up my web browser very quickly. Okay, so within my web browser, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Chrome. I'm going to navigate to the Chrome extensions. You can type in Chrome extensions up in the address bar, or click the puzzle icon over on the right-hand side underneath the minimize button and choose Manage Extensions from there. Once in here, we're going to click on the hamburger icon, the hamburger menu, which is our kind of 3 horizontal lines up here near extensions. We're going to go all the way down to Open Chrome Web Store. And from here, we're going to type in a couple things. So the first one we're going to do is type in Ghostery. When I type in Ghostery, you're going to see up at the top under extensions, Ghostery Privacy Ad Blocker. That's the one that we want to add, so we'll click on it. Mine says remove from Chrome because I already am using Ghostery. Yours will say add, so we're going to add that to our Chrome install. Once it is installed, we can go back to that puzzle icon or back to our extensions page. And we're going to click on Ghostery in our extensions menu. We should see a blue screen pop up. That blue screen is going to be where we're going to change a couple settings. So the first thing we're going to do here is click on the 3 dots, the menu. We're going to go into settings. And for global blocking, I have mine set for all of them are off. I've unblocked or unchecked all. That gives me a good idea of what third parties are running on the site. You can use this to block these specific types of trackers, but ultimately I'm going to unblock because I want to know what my risk is. Next, we're going to go to General Settings. Under General Settings, make sure the first 2 checkboxes are selected. And you can also, at this point, under the blocking heading, make sure the first 2 here are also checked off. That's up to you. Mine are unchecked. Under Tracker Tally, just make sure that the tracker tally will show, so the first checkbox is selected. You can change your settings here if you'd like the box to dismiss and where you'd like it to display. You can also choose to hide the tracker on trusted websites, totally up to you. So Ghostery, and let me kind of go to a website here. Ghostery will display inside a purple box. So here I am on Samsung.com. I'm choosing to display Ghostery here because there are a lot of entries. It will display all trackers being used by a website. Trackers will include cookies and third-party JavaScript. Most, if not all, third-party JavaScript will use trackers to track a visitor across the site and report back on the activity. An example here would be Facebook. Facebook will track your product views and clicks to then show you advertisements for those similar items when you visit your Facebook wall. Now, the nature of measuring trackers means this is not a 100% accurate depiction of the number of third-party JavaScript being used on this website. It is, however, a good indication of your risk when visiting the site. Typically, you'll find sites whose clientele are susceptible to online advertisements, enhanced purchase conversion techniques, or social networking posts have increased number of trackers. As an example here, we're on Samsung.com. If we were to also visit something like Apple.com, we can very easily see the difference between the two companies and their strategies on visitors. So this is Samsung. We can see the number of trackers here. And here we have Apple.com. Again, there's only a single tracker listed down here. So that's a good example of kind of the techniques being used by each company to get conversions or purchases by their visitors. So the next one we want to do is something called UBO scope. So we're again going to navigate to the Chrome extensions menu. We're going to again open up Chrome Web Store. I'm going to go ahead and type in UBO scope into the search bar, click the only results, click add to Chrome. Once UBO scope is added, if we go again back to Samsung, and I'll go ahead and use UBO scope here. It allows us to see the percentage of pages visited in the past, I think it's either 28 or 30 days, that are using specific trackers and third parties. So this is a great way to see how common these specific third parties are on the pages you visit. The higher the number, the higher the score, the higher the likelihood of your activities being tracked on the web. If a compromised third party is being used on 80% of the pages you visit, it may be a good idea to monitor your identity and payment information. Keeping up to date with Magecart attacks is key when using UBO scope. So let's look at a different way to measure your risk on a website. Let's look at a website risk analysis report. So I'm going to pull that over now for us. Here we go. This is a report. It's kind of the only time you'll ever hear me say Source Defense, even though I'm from Source Defense. This is a report that Source Defense does offer. It's free. You can head over to our website to kind of get one of these custom reports for you. But ultimately, what it does is it shows you in summary and sometimes in detail what your risk may be based on the third parties running on your site. So in this case, we did this on headphonescity.com. Headphonescity.com is a page that Source Defense owns. So for those of you looking to buy headphones, you won't be able to do that on Headphone City. That is kind of our page that we use for this style of demonstration. So what we found on here are a total of 75 scripts running on sensitive pages. Sensitive pages here would be pages that contain credentials or payment information, checkout pages, login pages, things like that. We know there were 65 total third-party scripts, 46 total fourth-party scripts, and we know the tag managers that are being used on this page. We quantify the, I guess we'll call it the exposure level, the risk level, in a numeric value. Although on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the legend. There are 5 here, so you could almost give them A, B, C, D, and F grades if you were to go that far. We then can give you an idea of what scripts are doing on each page. So if scripts are listening to page events, that's worth 15 points each. If they're listening to submissions, which may be more malicious, that's a higher numerical value. All of that adds up to our threat level. We then can kind of show you what the potential damage is that those scripts may be doing by having direct access to forms, by listening to click events, by listening to submission events. Also give you a quick summary of some of the scripts that are performing that behavior. A quick kind of intro, a quick definition of third-party scripts and sensitive pages. Compliance violations, which you may come across based on what your scripts are doing. A list of your scripts, and we'll just kind of scroll through that, and then a map or request map of your scripts. This is very similar to what we looked at earlier. We had, I think it was Taboola that was bringing in Facebook. This one here, we have, in this case, we have something like demand base bringing in Bidder.io. and Google Analytics bringing in Google DoubleClick, and so on and so forth. So get a good request map of what your scripts are bringing in, who they're bringing in, where they're originating from, all of that information. So let's inject, actually, some JavaScript into a website and kind of see what it looks like, see what it is to actually write JavaScript and inject on the site. So injecting JavaScript into, and I'm going to go back to my Google Chrome here, and I'm going to leave Samsung on the table for us. Injecting JavaScript into a browser is a simple process. So on Google Chrome here, we're going to open up the development console. For those that are unfamiliar with it, you'll hit F12 to open up the development console. Mine is showing here on the bottom. It's also zoomed in so everyone can see. Yours may be on the right-hand side, and if you'd like to make it appear on the bottom, you'll find the three-dot icon. You'll choose that, and for dockside, choose the third from the left or second to last, however you prefer to define it, but we'll simply dock to the bottom of the screen. Across the top down here, there are different tabs. There's elements and consoles and sources, and we're going to focus on console. That's where we want to be. I'm going to go ahead and click the no smoking sign to clear the console out of any information. And from here, what we want to do, or what we're going to do, is make one of those alert windows pop up. So it's a very basic JavaScript function. It's not commonly used these days, but it's a type of an alert that will pop open a small window within the browser, and it will contain a message within it. So what we're going to do here is put our cursor in the blank console, or if you haven't blanked it out, at the bottom of the console of all the list of text. We're going to type in alert, open parentheses, open quotes. We'll type in something like hello world, close quote, close parenthesis, semicolon, and click enter. So a window should appear with the text you put inside quotes as the message. So as we previously said, this is not used nowadays, but JavaScript is a way that makes web pages interactive. And this is a very quick and easy way to create a level of interactivity within a given page. Used to see this if you tried to maybe add something that wasn't in stock and there wasn't the technology or the code to tell you that. It told you once you tried to add something to your cart, you might get a pop-up that says out of stock. You might get a pop-up that says added to cart, whatever it may be. So now that we understand JavaScript can affect individual browsers independently of our connection back to a web server, all of that code is being executed within the browser. Let's take a look at what happens if we deface and change elements on a website. So we're again going to open up our page. I'm on Samsung.com. I know this demonstration will work on Samsung. You can try it on other pages if you'd like. But what we're going to do is inside our JavaScript injection guide PDF, when you have it, or if you're looking at it now, on page 2, there is a block of code. We're going to copy that block of code. We are going to paste that code in console. And we are going to execute that. We're going to click enter and have our browser execute this line or these lines of code. So when I do that, and I'll just click enter here, let's look at kind of like what happened, right? So the web page was defaced by adding elements to the top of the HTML document, and the console provided messages to the user, to the developer that's in here. So let's look at kind of how that happened. So first, we introduced new third-party JavaScript. That's the block of code that we copied and pasted. We introduced that to this website. Our browser, when we clicked enter, executed the code as written, which in our case added some white space and text to the top of the site. If we were to look at the code we used, we'll see that on line 2, so I'm just kind of, again, going to zoom in down here. On line 2, we told our browser to go to a specific URL which contained our third-party code. That third-party code was executed, and actually contained within it was a reference to another third party, something we would call a fourth party, which brought in this malicious code that defaced this website. In some instances, this third party of a third party can go all the way to a 10th party. These add-on parties are common because just as a website owner is outsourcing to a third party to provide features or enhancements to their site, that third party may do the same in order to enhance their code or gather vital visitor information on how their code is working or being used or how effective it is on a site. This is what makes Magecart or JavaScript client-side attacks so difficult to detect, prevent against, and why they are so dangerous. So you may be asking yourself, are there any problems? Are there any problems? There are a ton of problems. Are there any solutions to this type of problem? And so the answer would be yes. I'm going to go over a few. I'm not going to name names on these few. I'm just going to kind of give you the technology behind them and some of the pros and cons of them. So there are detection tools. Detection tools kind of scan the website from the outside and find issues. Very similar to that threat report we showed earlier. Some of the benefits are there's no integration required, and there's kind of instant deployment because it's basically telling a crawler or a bot to go to a site, scan it, report back with information. Unfortunately, it has a low chance of discovering a hack. And as with all kind of detection tools, detections occur after the fact, after an attack has already been successful. And because of that, it requires immediate action to remediate. Right? Once you find that there is an attack that is actively happening, you do need to remediate and act on that immediately. There's something called sub-resource integrity, or SRI. This allows us to control both the origin of a script and the content of it. So SRI allows us to create a hash or a fingerprint of any JavaScript file and make sure that it did not change when loaded into a browser. We can also make sure it's coming from the right location. But what do you do with JavaScript files that change dynamically from user to user? How do you hash that? Also, this will block the dynamic fourth parties that, though dangerous, increase the effectiveness of third parties and vendors, ultimately damaging the website's bottom line. So SRI has very good source control, very good change control. It is nearly impossible to bypass because any change to the code will provide a different hash versus the fingerprint or a different fingerprint that we have on file. They will not match. SRI may block third-party operation. It does require close cooperation from the third party or from the repository in order to make sure that the changes are not made frequently enough that I need to re-fingerprint every hour. And it also cannot handle dynamic JavaScript. It cannot handle JavaScript with changes based on user actions on the site, previous user visits, things like that. So we have something called Content Security Policy, or CSP. CSP is a native kind of function to most modern web browsers. It allows us to define a set of directives that will whitelist specific domains. So it allows kind of extensive control over those external sources, allowing scripts from certain domains, not allowing from others. It prevents cross-site scripting attacks. That's ultimately what CSP was created for, was cross-site scripting. It is now being used in some ways to detect or try to prevent these Magecart style attacks. CSP, depending on your configuration, may block third-party operation. It's not supported on older browsers. And unfortunately, it is easy to bypass. I would recommend for those that are looking at ways to bypass CSP, just out of curiosity, if you actually type in CSP bypass into your favorite search engine, you'll probably get a couple hundred, if not a few thousand different websites which contain lists or techniques to bypass CSP based on the configuration at hand. So again, very good at cross-site scripting attacks, easy to bypass when it comes to these Magecart attacks. We then get into something called JavaScript proxy. JavaScript proxy is a method that can be utilized in the browser that allows an overwrite of some of the prototypes. For example, you can overwrite the input get value and decide if you want to allow it or not. So the nice part about JavaScript proxying is it can cover libraries and internal code. So it can cover third and first party. It's able to be extremely granular on what is allowed or not allowed. But it is also something that might block third-party operation, third-party integration. It's very, very complicated to configure, especially when you're working with JavaScript that is not your own. And it is also, unfortunately, easy to bypass. So again, searching JavaScript proxy bypass or JS proxy bypass in your favorite search engine should get you a few hundred results. The last one that we will talk about is real-time sandboxing or isolation techniques. Real-time sandboxing is agnostic to third parties. So it requires no contact with the vendor. It works for third and fourth and fifth and down the line parties. It allows for approved actions only, whether they're malicious or not. What that might mean to those of you in the security world, it's very similar to a zero trust methodology. So I give you permission to perform this one and only function. If you try to do anything else, it is denied. You have zero trust to do anything else. You only are trusted to perform this one function. Real-time sandboxing can offer complete visibility into kind of what your third parties are doing on a website. If they're skimming elements they shouldn't be or adding elements they shouldn't be, real-time sandboxing isolation offers that visibility. Unfortunately, it may also block third-party operation depending on what that third party is trying to do. And it is also not supported on older browsers. So although at this point, I think the only older browser we know of is Internet Explorer, and I don't think that's been supported for a while. Thank you for your time today. For more information on Source Defense, our solutions, and our technology, please visit www.sourcedefense.com.